IGI Global is a publisher of the latest research in information, computer science, and technology as applied to business and public administration, engineering, education, medical and healthcare, and social science. You will find Dr. Tomei's books along with other resources dedicated to the subject of technology and education in our online bookstore. Our InfoSci Books database contains over 1,600 books on over 200 disciplines, from technology, business, medicine, education, and engineering. We are currently offering a 30-day trial of our InfoSci Books database so you can experience this amazing collection for yourself. We also just started a new promotion where libraries who purchase our products receive institution-wide access for 2 years. For more information on that, please refer to our website or contact eResources at igiglobal.com. Aristotle once said, "The one exclusive sign of thorough knowledge is the power of teaching," and that is why we are all here today. So we'll get started with today's symposium. First of all, I just want to review a few housekeeping items to let you know how you can utilize GoToWebinar software and participate in today's web event. Excuse me. We're looking at an example here of the GoToWebinar attendee interface. It's made up of 2 parts. The viewer window is on the left, which allows you to see everything the presenter will share on their screen, and the control panel at the right. With the control panel is how you can participate in today's event. So let's look at that first. By clicking the orange arrow, you can open and close your control panel. From the View menu, you can also set the control panel not to auto-hide when it's inactive if you prefer to keep it open throughout the presentation. The audio panel provides audio information. By default, you have joined the webinar via mic and speakers. If you want, you can click Audio Setup to select your computer speaker or headset devices, but if you prefer, you can join the audio via telephone by selecting Use Telephone. To use your telephone, you'll have to enter the audio pin that is listed on your control panel. It gives you that number. Today's webinar is going to be really interactive and collaborative. We will reserve time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A. But should you have a question you'd like to ask immediately, you can type it into the question box. You'll see that on your control panel right there. GoToWebinar also provides a hand raise button, which we will be using today. You'll see that on your control panel as well. You can use that to participate and silently answer questions that Dr. Tomei will ask. As a final reminder, today's webinar will be recorded, and everyone in attendance will receive an email with a link to view the recording of today's event. Thank you all so much for taking time to join us. Today we have with us Dr. Lawrence Tomei, author of The Text Engine for Designing Technology-Based Teaching and Taxonomy for the Technology Domain, valuable references that we are actually giving away today to 2 randomly chosen participants. Lawrence A. Tomei is the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Professor of Education at Robert Morris University. He holds a dual appointment as a full Professor of Education in the School of Education and Social Sciences. In addition to his tremendous achievement as a writer and author, he entered the United States Air Force in September 1972 and served on active duty until his retirement in 1994 as a lieutenant colonel. At this time, Dr. Tomei, I will turn the floor over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and what a treat for me to share some of my research in my area of interest in instructional technology. I'm learning a little bit about GoToWebinar, the same as you, and so I'm going to be bringing up my screen here. looks like we're okay. I'm going to be depending on Ann here to give me any feedback related to how my voice is coming across or how the slides are coming across. But in addition to being a member of the faculty here at Robert Morris, if you haven't heard of Robert Morris University, we're a private, non-for-profit university just outside of the Pittsburgh area between the city of Pittsburgh and its international airport, for those of you that have ever been to our lovely city. And been here at Robert Morris for about 8 years, and before that I was at Duquesne University, and as Ann mentioned, before that I was on active duty in the Air Force. So a special welcome to all our veterans out there. My presentation today is going to cover the work that has been done dealing with the preparation of instructional materials that are technology based. So this will give us a chance to talk a little bit about 2 books, and if you just heard that, there's a severe thunderstorm warning. It was almost like right on cue right behind me, and we have been known to lose power, so if that happens, I told Ann that I would attempt to come back online as quickly as possible here. So hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed that we just have a little bit of noise and nothing else that will disrupt us. So that's a little bit about me. I teach in the doctorate program, I teach in a master's program, and I teach instructional technology. That's been my forte for about the last 22 years. I'd like to get an idea, and at the same time we'll give everybody a chance to try out our GoToWebinar features here, so that I get an idea, maybe a little bit of who you are. And so here's what I'd like to try to begin our symposium together. I'd like to know, and you can do this by raising your hand, the number of you that are in the K-12 environment, your teachers or administrators or technologists. How many of you are in K-12? Okay. And Ann, how many is that? Can you tell me?
Looks like I have 4.
Okay. All right. Let's erase those off, and let's ask for those that are in higher education. So have your hands raised. Okay, Ann, how many we got?
There might be still coming in, but it looks like so far we have 14.
Okay, that gives us an idea. All right, and are there any of you out there that are in the corporate environment, corporate trainers?
Just 1.
Okay. All right, that gives us a feel, and those are about the numbers that I expected in terms of percentages. Now, it looks like we have about 30-some people on right now, and probably more will join us in a few minutes. But that gives us an idea. But you know what? Those numbers are absolutely perfect for what we want to do today, because we're going to be talking here for the next hour or so on a model for developing technology-based instruction. We have been using technology now for the better part of the last 40 years. For me, I bought my first Apple computer in 1978, and have been using it for educational purposes ever since. The personal computer, that is. My Apple is now sitting underneath the steps, and one of these days it will be worth a fortune. But one of the things that I've been able to do in my capacity as an educator is to look at the models for integrating technology into our courses. And I have developed two tools that I want to share with you this afternoon, and hopefully they will become something that you'll take an interest in and perhaps consider. So we're going to look at this item called this model called the Engine for Technology-Based Teaching. It's going to be based on a taxonomy for the technology domain that I was able to develop. And then we're going to try to apply it to some lesson plans, templates for the traditional, the adult, and the distance learners. So if you're, whether you're teaching online or you're teaching in a more traditional format, this presentation this afternoon is, I think, going to be something that you can definitely use. In the invitation that was sent out to join this webinar this afternoon, I believe we asked you to perhaps bring along with you some lesson plans that you might use, that you might have used in the classroom. I hope you had a chance to do that. If you didn't, that's fine, but we're going to be looking at creating lesson plans for these three categories of learners, and specifically in the area of technology-based resources. So I want you to be able to pull your lesson plans out at some point, and we're going to have you actually examine your own learning objectives. Now, at the end of the presentation, Ann and I are going to be picking two of the participants, two of you that have joined us for the webinar this afternoon, and you'll be given your choice of one of these two books that we'll be showing you a little bit later on. Okay? So that's what we've got planned for the afternoon, and I'm going to try to move us through this in a nice pace, but at the same time I'm going to be asking you a series of questions and giving you a chance to chat with me online. Okay? Instructional system design models. If you've heard the term ISD, you probably know that over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, ISD models have basically enabled educators to tackle the design of new lessons or curriculum. And they do it in a very systematic, methodical, organized manner. It's interesting, the first class I ever taught in my life was in 1974 when I was a young lieutenant in the Air Force, and I was teaching a military course. And when they made me an instructor, they said, here's the course that you're going to be teaching. And I thought, okay, I'm not too familiar with teaching yet. I was starting my career, but I think I can teach a class. And they said, well, you need to go take this course on how to develop a course. And I thought, well, that seems to be kind of, overkill, but, you're in the military, you salute, and you go take the class. And what they were teaching me in 1974 was instructional system design. It was, they helped me visualize all of the tasks associated with the sequencing of an instructional unit. The engine that we're going to talk about this afternoon, this engine for technology-based teaching, is on this slide right here. And it's an engine. I made it look like gears, and I gave it 5 major components that you see here. An initial focus on the learner, then focus on learning itself, looking at the resources. Next, we look at the delivery modalities, and finally we focus on outcomes. And we'll be getting into this engine a little bit as we go through here, but I wanted to share with you a little bit the fact that we have here for technology-based instruction is built on a behavioral approach, and it's based on the success of several other authors that have provided us their instructional system design model. If you've done any formal ISD training, And as you know, if you're an educator, hopefully you have probably run across one, maybe two, or perhaps even all three of these models that are shown here. Perhaps the oldest or most commonly the most common model for ISD is called the ADDIE model. And you can see the elements of the ADDIE model there. It starts with an analysis of what it is you're going to be teaching, okay? And then it moves kind of counterclockwise here to the design of the instruction, the development of the instructional resources, then you implement the class, and then you evaluate it and start the process all over again. ADDIE model has been around for a long time, and actually that was the first model that I learned how to use to develop a course. But since then, there's been two others that have been very, very popular. Wiggins and Mackay offered us what's called the backward design model, and you see that in the upper right corner of this slide. And what their concept is you start with the end first, the desired results, the goals, your standards. What do you want the student to learn? And then from that, you create a curriculum that provides what they call the evidence of learning, the performances. And then finally, you plan your learning experience and instruction. So, you know, their contribution to the literature has been one of starting with the results first and then designing the instruction. The ADDIE model says, yeah, you do some analysis, but then you begin the design and development and then do the evaluation at the end. Those two models have been very, very popular and still are. A new one, relatively new, is the Kemp model that describes an approach that considers a cycle for designing instruction. Okay? And as you can see, instead of 5 elements that the ADDIE model has, or 3 elements that the backward design model has, the Kemp model has 9 elements. Okay? And it starts with a definition of the instructional problem and moves on through the process. Okay? And it goes clockwise. Sorry about that little change in direction here. We start with the instructional problem, then you define the learner characteristics. And so this model, these models for instructional design are a very efficient way of creating a lesson. Okay? What the engine does is it infuses the technology piece, but it does it in an atmosphere of pedagogy, okay, of a focus on the learner. Now, one of the problems I think we have, you know, the title of this program is, you know, kind of what are we missing? I would propose to you that this is what we're missing, okay? As we design and develop and implement technology-based resources, we have a tendency to focus on the technology and what it can contribute and forget about the pedagogies that are associated with teaching, you know. And you know, we said it looked like about 60% of the people that were online when we did the poll at the beginning were dealing with higher education. And what better example do we have than the professors that we put in the classroom in a university? Here at Robert Morris, when we hire an engineering professor, we hire that person because he or she has been successful. Typically, when we bring them in, we don't have a clue whether they can teach or not. And it's in this puzzle about using technology. For the traditional learner, Okay, we talk about we use the word pedagogy, the teaching of children, if you will. And if you are an educator yourself, if you came out of the school of education at your school, or you were brought up as a teacher, then you've got some of the pedagogical background into teaching K to 12 students. And so the word pedagogy, which is a kind of a time-honored learning theory of the traditional learner, has been around for at least the last 60 years. I won't go through each of these in a lot of detail because we are kind of limited in our time, but behaviorism basically started in the 1950s with guys like Pavlov and Skinner, and you probably have learned about, you've probably been instructed in the idea of learning behaviorally, with things like behavioral learning objectives, stimulus, response, and reinforcement. Okay, behaviorism started in the 1950s with a look at with businesses and organizations, and things like the assembly lines, and it was a way for us to look at using instruction behaviorally to teach. Great examples, right? And you could probably come up with a dozen of them yourself. I've got 4 grandchildren right now. The oldest is 6 and the youngest is 9 months. And I got 2 2-year-olds in the middle of that. When they came over to spend the weekend with us last weekend, Grandma was making something on the stove, and the 2-year-old went over and wanted to find out what it was and stuck his hand up there, see if he could pull down the pan of peas that was cooking up there. Well, you know what? That wasn't the time to try to explain to the child that wasn't a good idea. So Grandpa had to come behind him and give him a little bit of negative reinforcement, if you will. So he got a little smack on the butt there, and was told that that's not what we do around here in the kitchen. But that's a behavioral way of teaching, and we use technology quite a bit behaviorally, don't we? And so if you're teaching a traditional learner, the pedagogy of behaviorism is a very useful tool for you to create technology-based resources. But it doesn't explain all learning. The cognitivists came in the 1970s, and we started to learn that cognitivism is a way of looking at teaching from a building block approach. Okay, guys like Piaget, Vygotsky, they all looked at this idea of using instruction from a cognitive perspective, okay, from a building block approach, from a thinking approach. And then in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, for those of us that are old enough to remember that, we started looking at the pedagogy of humanism, this idea that I don't teach, you learn, okay? And so in the 70s and 80s, we started looking at the humanistic way of teaching. Now, for those of us that are teaching traditional learners, keep in mind that these are 3 schools of educational psychology that are not typically taught to non-educators. Okay? My example of the engineer probably doesn't know the difference between B.F. Skinner and Abraham Maslow. Okay? But educators do. And it's something that we can share with our colleagues, and we try to do that here at our university in explaining to them how they can use this pedagogy of teaching in the classroom. Now, that's the traditional side. Learning theories for the adult learner, of course, was the domain of Malcolm Knowles in the 1980s. his theory of andragogy kind of redefined the previous child-only perception of learning. Adult learning is characterized, as you see on the screen. It's experiential. It's problem-based. Adults want to know, when they learn something, they want to use it right away. And it's typically self-directed. Now that brings into play a whole lot of different practical kind of strategies that we can use in the classroom. Things like case studies, role-playing, simulations, and so on. Things that we wouldn't typically use in a traditional classroom. And then finally, we've got this new word that that was introduced in 1990, the word of allegory, which is now associated with online learning and learning at a distance. And it examines distant students, and it found that there are certain common characteristics that lend themselves to a good distance learner. Okay, for example, you can see here independent and group work, minimal supervision, time management, and so on. So the first elements that we see in this engine help us to focus on the learner. Okay, and it's a very important piece, and it's one that is typically missing in the design of technology-based instruction. Okay, once we've identified who our learner is, we can begin to focus on the learning process itself. Okay, and we have again some traditional adult and distance-based taxonomies that can help us design good instruction. Again, my guess is perhaps more of our faculty have heard of Bloom's taxonomy, but that is pretty much on the traditional side. Okay, Bloom did his work in the 1950s, so we're talking like almost 60 years ago that Bloom did his work, and he developed taxonomies, classification systems, by looking at the learning objectives of many lesson plans and professors at all different levels, and his team came up with the 6 progressively complex steps of cognitive development that you see here, and you're probably familiar with, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. Okay? But the more I got into teaching adults over the last couple of years, and then teaching at a distance in maybe the last 8 years, I found that traditional taxonomy only takes us so far. It only takes us looking at traditional kind of instruction. But how about adults, for example? I've had adults that have come to me and said, you know what, I've taken a course on technology as an undergrad, I've taken a course in technology as a grad student, and now you want to give me a course in technology in my doctorate program. Well, what's going to be different? What am I doing, what's differently? And adult learners kind of seek that distinction among those levels of courses. Again, some of these courses have the same title. Some of them even might have the same learning objectives. And so I came up with, and this is kind of like my little invention here, came up with this concept called the Carp model. And here's what I tell my students, at my level. I tell them, that the Carp taxonomy helps me address the demands of adults. Okay, and at the undergraduate level, I am going to teach technology or whatever I'm teaching at the knowledge level. Okay, and I think you would probably all agree to me that if you walked into an undergrad freshman class in educational psychology, for example, that the students there are pretty much in the receive-only mode. You know, you're up in the front. They expect you to be the the smart person, the sage on the stage, and they want you to deliver the instruction. And they don't ask me any questions, don't ask me to make any contributions. And so I tell them at that level, we're going to focus on knowledge. At the graduate level, though, I expect you to have that knowledge, and I expect you to focus on application, being able to use that knowledge. So again, think of a grad course in education. Typically, those people that are in a master's program in education are teachers, right? And so they're there to learn how to apply that knowledge, how to apply that information. So I might take an adult course in instructional technology and talk about how they can use it to teach in a classroom. All right? And then finally, with my doctorate students, I talk to them about concentrating on research, practice, and evaluation. So when we talk about podcasting as an example, at the undergrad level, I might teach them what podcasting is. At a grad master's course, I might teach them how to use podcasting in the classroom. And at the doctorate level, we want to discuss what the research says about podcasting. Does it work? How do we use podcasting in a K-12 classroom, the practice piece? And then finally, how to evaluate the success of podcasting. Okay? So this is another piece that we're missing a lot when we develop technology-based courses. Are we doing it at the traditional level? Are we doing it at the adult level? And then which level of these taxonomies are we talking about? And then finally, the new thing that we'll introduce this afternoon is a new taxonomy. For those of you that know Bloom, you realize that the taxonomy that we're looking at here is actually called the taxonomy of the cognitive domain. But he also looked at two other domains. He looked at the affective domain, teaching things like values and so forth, and he looked at the psychomotor domain. Okay, but we've never had a taxonomy for the technology domain, and that's what I'm proposing with this model here, that takes us from literacy through communications or collaboration to decision making, infusion, integration, and technology. And I'll cover more of that a little bit later. But if you walk away with nothing from this symposium other than, hey, you know what? There's a new taxonomy out there for how I can develop my materials, my technology-based instructional materials. I can not only use Bloom's taxonomy, I can not only consider the adult population and at what level I want them to learn, but I can also consider the technologies themselves that I'm using. Okay, so that's why this focus is going to be on creating learning objectives that are very overt to the learner. Okay, very specific. Okay, how many of you? Let me get a show of hands here. If I asked you what are the components of a good learning objective, how many of you would feel comfortable in giving me some answers? Matter of fact, use the chat box that's down in the, I think, the bottom right there, and add or type in what you think are some of the key components of a good learning objective. What might they be? Active verb. Good. That's a good one. It should be measurable. Excellent. That's a good one. Focus is on the learner, right. Okay. Smart objectives, good. All right, Jeff, Marianne, you guys are giving me some excellent things. If I were to look at your syllabi, would I see learning objectives that are observable and measurable, that have specific criteria for them? Or would they be, what's wrong with this, for example? I saw this one time in a music class. You know, by the end of this semester, all students will be able to appreciate Beethoven. Interesting one. What's wrong with that learning objective? Yeah, how do you measure appreciate? Right. How do you know when you've succeeded? How do you know when you've taught the lesson? It's not demonstratable, as Kevin said. That's right. Okay, so you can see here now with this focus on the learning that this is another piece of the puzzle that we are often missing in the design of technology-based instruction. Okay, let's move on if we can. Let's talk about focus on resources, and we'll spend just a minute here. I'm talking here now about text-based, visual-based, and what I call multimedia-based resources. You know, resources for the traditional adult and distance learner are not particularly different among those three categories. We used this whole triad, if you will, of content material when we're teaching any of these three levels of learners, the traditional, the adult, or the distance learner. But we use them differently, right? For example, teachers of traditional students, they still find that concrete hard copy resources still make very effective learning tools, and so we use textbooks. We continue to use those. We use student handouts, study guides. But you know what? There are some technology-based resources that could add to this list of learning materials. The reason that we typically use these simpler resources for the traditional learner is because, well, they're basically more portable and they're basically lower priced. A lot of our students in K-12 still expect to use the textbook. But you know what? There's some newer materials out there that you need to consider. There's a category of text-based material out there called the hyperbook. And I don't know how many of you have ever had a chance to use a hyperbook, but it's basically a text-based document that has links, and it has video clips, and it has audio clips, and it has those kinds of resources that are very effective in helping students to use technology for individualized learning and more inquiry kind of learning opportunities. For the adult learner, visual technologies, visual materials are a little bit more important, perhaps, than text-based materials. I'm not sure how many of you have ever heard of an interactive lesson. But an interactive lesson is basically a PowerPoint presentation that can be done individually, can be done by the student themselves. And it includes hyperlinks, it includes video clips, it includes sound files, and it is used with an assessment piece built into it already. How many are comfortable with, let's say, advanced PowerPoint? If I asked you, how many of you raise your hand, have ever used highlights and action buttons? Okay. Looks like quite a few of you. Quite a few of you have. Okay. I can see the numbers here. Looks like I said, quite a few of you use those. Good. Now, Anne, can you eliminate those?
Of course.
I mean, I can do it too. Okay. I just
Yeah,
figured out how to do it. So let me turn around and ask you another question. How many of you know what the kiosk mode is in PowerPoint? If you do, raise your hand. Okay, I see a couple of you, but not very many. Write that note down for yourself to look at in the future. When you go into PowerPoint, go into the setup, into the slideshow. Underneath the slideshow, go into the setup show and look at how you can set a presentation in the kiosk mode, because that's the key to an interactive lesson. And I have my students using PowerPoint to create interactive lessons that they provide the textual material, they provide links to the internet, they use action buttons and hide slides to ask questions and get feedback, but they also use the kiosk mode, which basically, you know what a kiosk is. It's, you know, you go to the mall and you want to find out where J.C. Penney's is, and you go to that little information booth in the middle of the mall, and you start hitting a few buttons, and it shows you where the store is that you're looking for. Well, PowerPoint actually has that feature built in, and it's called a kiosk mode. Okay, so you can use that for adult learning in the visual and multimedia area. Finally, though, distance learners, they command probably the widest assortment of learning materials. I've got faculty that feel as though, if I give them a Blackboard shell and they take all of their handouts and study guides and instructional materials and they put them in a Blackboard course, that we're supposed to give them $2,650 for designing an online course. Okay, my guess is several of you understand what I'm saying here. They don't realize that a distance learner is looking for way more assortment of learning materials in terms of quantity, in terms of format, in terms of web-based materials, computer objects, digital content, audio-visual presentation, threaded discussions, online logs. The list continues to grow every time somebody does search on Web 2.0 technologies. Fortunately, we're able to give them a learning management system. We use Blackboard. I've also used WebCT before Blackboard bought them out. Used eCollege, used Moodle, and there's several others now that are coming on board, Canvas and a few others. Resources is the key to developing a good technology-based lesson. Our focus on delivery can also look at the difference between traditional adult and group distance learners, okay, in terms of their key focus areas. We won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but you know what? Lecture is still, lectures and seminars and demonstrations historically are the instructional strategies of the traditional teacher. Especially in a classroom-centered presentation. But this sage on the stage concept is rapidly diminishing. And one of the things that we're missing in our technology-based instruction is an understanding of the kinds of students that are coming to us. It used to be that lectures and seminars and demonstrations was what the college and even the high school student expected, but not so much anymore. And even if we do offer lectures, and there's nothing wrong with them, they're still a very valid instructional delivery modality. But what's happening now is after you deliver a lecture, and this is a good example, Anne said that she will have a link to the presentation available for you so that you can go back. And you know what? We've got college students and we've got high school students now that do not understand why when they come out of a 50-minute lecture presentation, that 30 minutes after that, you know, they can't download the podcast of that lecture. You know, so traditional students are expecting the uses of technology quite a bit. For the adult learner, you know, their demands are a whole lot different. They require a different suite of instructional strategies. You know, the concept of andragogy, teaching adults, places that emphasis on more active learning. I think we would all agree with that. Things like cooperative learning, you know, discovery learning, group work, group activities, all based on real-world experiences and realistic learning outcomes. For the distance learner, boy, this is a real challenge now, isn't it? What are we missing with the distance learner? I have a little trouble sometimes. Frankly, to be truthful, I don't like teaching a totally online course. An asynchronous, totally online course. I guess I'm maybe a little too old, where I still like the interaction, the communication that goes between the instructor and the student. So usually I don't teach any totally online courses. I'll teach hybrid courses. I love teaching hybrid, and when I talk hybrid now, I'm talking about kind of blended learning courses, which is another term that you probably have run across. You know, the idea of combining synchronous and asynchronous communications, of using all of the tools available in a learning management system to promote delivery strategies to the distance learner that bring them up into higher order thinking skills and cooperative strategies. So, you know, the piece that we're missing with online right now is making a distinction. I don't know whether you do this at your school or not, but here at Robert Morris, we make a distinction between what I call a repository course, a hybrid course, and a totally online immersion course. Okay? And we offer our faculty LMS, Learning Management System, Blackboard shells in all three of those environments. We have some faculty that simply use their shell as a repository of instructional materials. So they put their syllabus out there, they put some reading materials out there, they probably, you know, they may use it for their test, but they don't use it for anything else. My example of a hybrid course, I use my Blackboard shell to teach nurses the concepts of educational psychology. And it's an 8-week course, and we do 4 courses in a traditional classroom environment, and I do 4 courses in a synchronous online mode, where they have to meet me online, and we do something similar to what we're doing here with this GoToWebinar, where we have webinars, and you know, they're required to make contributions, as I'm asking you to do a little bit today. And then we do have some asynchronous pieces that they can do all by themselves as well. So again, what are we missing? We're missing the breadth of course tools that can be used in an online environment. Okay, one too many clicks. Here we go. The final part of this engine for designing technology-based materials is the outcomes. And here are the typical assessment measures that we attribute to the traditional, the adult, and now the distance learner. Although, again, like we did with resources, the text, visual, and multimedia-based, these outcomes or these assessments can be used in any of these environments. It's just that typically assessment for traditional classes is done with conventional assessment tools. Okay? For example, conventional assessment often takes the form of a single dimension. Characteristically, their objectives, they're done summatively at the end of a lesson or a course, a lot of times limited to rote memorization, the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy, if you will. Okay? So we're talking here now about multiple choice, true, false, short answer instruments, things that have pretty much garnered a lot of criticism over the last couple of years. But we still use them. And why do we use them? Well, because they have a significant amount of advantages. For example, we know that conventional assessment are less time-consuming to construct. They're less time-consuming to grade, and they're a lot more straightforward in terms of their administration. We can perform internal consistency and reliability tests against conventional assessments much easier than we can at the other two levels. So we use things like, weekly quizzes, final exams, and so on. So what are we missing? We're missing the opportunity to use the technology to help the traditional learner focus on their outcomes. Okay. For the adult learner, we try to use more authentic assessment. Okay, eliciting higher order thinking, focusing on a student's analytical skills, the ability to integrate what we just taught them, their creativity, and perhaps some capacity to work collaboratively. Okay, so with authentic assessments, we have the ability to integrate things like portfolios and use that for the adult learner. I just went to a presentation the other day. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of, what was it called, live text. They have these e-portfolios now that can be used with adult learners, mostly college level, but they could be used at undergrad and even I would say higher high school age students. And they help the student build authentic portfolios, okay, where they have to evidence their written and oral skills, their authentic learning that they've done in their classes. E-portfolios are also very common assessment tools for the adult learner. Okay, and then finally we've got these new assessment tools that are being done at a distance. Some pretty exciting things coming up here. Besides online exams and electronic portfolios, when I do assessments of my online students, I do it virtually now. Okay, I use Skype, I use video conferencing, I have them use video techniques, even something as simple as a video camera on their cell phone to capture their learning and send it to me in a timely way to show me, to talk to me about what they've learned. So what we're talking about so far now is a model. It shows you the pieces of learning that we have been missing. We haven't thought all the way through all of these pieces before. Before we start looking at our own lesson plans, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about this taxonomy for the technology domain. I started developing this thing back in 1996, and as a result of a lot of work with students of my own at the undergrad and master's and even doctorate level, I came up with this taxonomy for the technology domain. You can see it's similar in structure, and it's actually fairly similar in purpose to Bloom's taxonomy. where he went from the basic knowledge up to evaluation. I wanted to go from the literacy skills to this area that I call technology, and I'll explain that more in a second. But take a look. You probably have all seen this. This is an example of action words for Bloom's taxonomy for those 6 levels. So when you create learning objectives and you say the student would be able to sketch, sorry about that, to demonstrate, to compare, to appraise, to distinguish. Okay, these, Bloom created his taxonomies in the late 50s, and from that moment when he offered the taxonomy up until today, the most common research that has been done for Bloom's taxonomy is in this area of action verbs, action words. Okay, and so as we create our learning objectives, we ought to be considering these action words. So when you look at your own lesson plans, I want you to look at what words you're using to tell the student what it is they have to do. Okay? If all you're asking them to do is list or name or recall or tabulate, then your learning objectives are at the very low end of Bloom's taxonomy. And that might be okay for some things, but the idea is to move them into these higher order skills over here. And to do that, they have to be able to generalize and formulate and combine and support, and you get the idea. Well, I'm no idiot. When I started to create this taxonomy for the technology domain, I looked at what Bloom had done. He had 6 steps, so I got 6 steps. He started from the simple to the complex, and that's what I'm doing in my taxonomy, as you'll see in a second. He is looking at higher order skills, and he's also this whole taxonomy issue is a hierarchical system. In other words, I can't ask you to apply something unless you have comprehended the idea and you have the knowledge base. I can't have you do any synthesis, putting things together, unless you can take it apart and you have the application and the comprehension and the knowledge. So the taxonomy for the technology domain is also hierarchical. And let me just spend a little time with you on this. At the lowest level of the technology taxonomy is literacy skills. Okay? Things that I expect you to be able to do. And I've, over the course of the last 10 years, have had students who have created these action verbs for this level. Okay? So, for example, at the lowest level of technology, you ought to be able to launch something. You can download it. You can scan it. You can save it. You can point and click. You can open, save, and close. And just like Bloom's taxonomy, if your students do not have the mastery of the literacy level, they can't go any higher. Okay? And we see this all the time in high schools and even in colleges. We usually, we have a first-year studies program here at Robert Morris where all of our freshmen have to take this one course that introduces them to college. And one of the lessons in that course is a lesson on technology literacy. Where are you with literacy? And you would think that in 2012, that our students would be coming from high schools with a significant level of literacy in technology, basic computer skills, understanding computer terms and concepts, understanding computer hardware. But what we find is we still have a good 30% of our students that are not technology literate. And how can we ask them to go to the next step? How can we ask them to use technology to collaborate, okay, to use technology for written and oral communication, for the exchange of information, for interpersonal collaboration, if they don't have the basic literacy skills. So we have a separate course that they can take to get them up to speed on there. And if you're teaching at any level, if you're teaching at the distance learning level, okay, distance teachers, you have to initially, as you start the course, seek evidence of their mastery of collaborative skills, okay? And we do that by asking them to share information in written form. Now, collaboration runs the gamut. It's not just email, okay, even though email is obviously in there, but it's sharing resources on the website, in a chat room, or a dialogue, discussion blog. It's even writing a processing paper. I can't tell you the amount of trouble that we've had with students who can't use a word processing system like Microsoft Word to put together a paper. Okay, so we go back and we deal with this kind of interchange of information at the second level. Once they can collaborate, we can help them use technology for decision making. And again, I'm not talking here about using just spreadsheets in Excel. I'm talking about using technology in new and concrete situations to help them make to get a greater understanding of their material, their instructional materials. So we're talking about things like brainstorming software. Somebody type into the box here, what other decision-making software is out there besides Excel? What are some other things that you use? SPSS, excellent example. Not my favorite software package, but an excellent example. And it's not my favorite because it's very expensive, and IBM bought it. And I wish we would have kept it with SPSS. Minitab, Access, good. Great examples. Couple more. Other decision-making kinds of software. Cognos, excellent. Okay. All right, we got some really good examples, and I appreciate the contributions here. The Minitab, SPSS, all good examples of decision-making software. Brainstorming software is also another good one. How many of you are familiar with Inspiration and Kidspiration? That's basically a decision-making software package, isn't it? Okay? And using technology to make decisions requires a greater understanding than the previous two stages. So I can't evaluate alternatives unless I can share my answers, share my results collaboratively, and I've got the basic literacy skills to use spreadsheets. Okay? So now you're getting the idea. This is a brand new taxonomy now in a whole different domain. Okay? My next domain, the one that I said that I identify is what I call technology for learning. On the previous side, you might have seen the word infusion, but now we're kind of calling it technology for learning, for going out and finding and identifying and bringing together and actually implementing educational resources that currently exist that can help you learn. Okay, so you're going to see some words in here like investigate, incorporate, construct, download, and here's my favorite word right there. Okay? When I was at Duquesne University, that's a Catholic university. And people said, well, aren't you stealing sites? Aren't you stealing contextual information? Aren't you stealing video? And I say, no, this is a Catholic university. We don't steal, we harvest. Okay, and I've actually seen that word in a research article. They use that to talk about picking up and infusing, technology that can be used for learning. And so, again, we're talking here more than just internet sites. We're talking about educational software. We're talking about electronic journals. We're talking about internet sites, certainly. So, but this is one now in which you go out and you find sites and materials that are currently exist. The next step in our domain, though, technology for teaching. This is at a very high level now. This is where we develop our own previously non-existent material to help ourselves or others better understand the lesson. Okay, so we go out to the internet, we look at YouTube, we find material that's available, we pick and choose the content, we bring it back in, and we compose our own new material. If you have ever gone to a high school, a senior project demonstration, this is what I'm talking about. We're teaching our students. It used to be, a senior project was maybe a paper, or perhaps it was a presentation. But if you look at senior high school demonstrations now, senior high school projects, they are developing, designing, and using PowerPoint presentations to, examine the skeleton of the human body, to present the major concepts of a health-based lesson. They're doing their own things. They're creating their own materials. This is at the very highest level, creating your own instructional materials. This is a part that we're missing. Okay? A lot of times our faculty assume that, well, I'm doing something technology-based if I just go grab this YouTube video and bring it into my presentation, bring it into my classroom. Well, that YouTube presentation might be 15 minutes long, and you really only want 6 minutes of it or 4 minutes of it. And so at this level, this fifth level, we're creating our own video in which we splice out the 6 minutes that we need. So this is something that you can talk to your faculty about. This is a part of the technology that they're missing, okay, when they design instruction. Okay. How many of you, let's raise your hands, how many of you have created your own technology-based materials? Okay, quite a few of you. That's good. That's good. Good, good, good. Okay, but it's amazing, again, for some of our faculty, and I'm sure we're no different than anybody else, some of our faculty feel as though if they go get somebody else's PowerPoint, or they go get somebody else's video clip, or they find something, a PDF file online, that is a technology-based online course. Okay, and we know it's not. You've got to create your own materials. Okay, and then since Bloom had 6 levels, my top level is actually called Techology. It uses this word ology. Okay, what does, answer this in the question, what does ology mean? What does the Greek suffix ology mean? Exactly, study of. Okay, the study of. And so I initially called this level technologyology, okay? But that got a little bit cumbersome. This is the top level. This is the study of social issues that surface whenever technology use is brought into the picture. You know, for teachers of technology-based materials, you're talking about issues such as values, ethics, the standards that we use with respect to the uses of technology, issues such as copyright and fair use, the use of commercial off-the-shelf tools. How many of you use, let's see, raised hands, how many of you use Turnitin or Safe Assign for anti-plagiarism? Okay, looks like a couple of you. Okay, that's an issue that we talk about all the time here on our campus. Censorship, legal and moral issues. You got the idea here. These are the top level issues that you need to talk about when it comes to creating technology-based lessons. Okay, we're going to wrap up by kind of trying to put all of this together into a template. If you have a lesson plan in front of you, take a look if you're using taxonomy. Talk about a taxonomy or classification system for technology. Here's a template for you. You can use this as you wish. Okay, for the traditional learner, here's the elements of the engine broken out by the kinds of learners. So, for example, lesson plans typically identified here. Teaching the date of the lessons, so forth. The major instructional applications all have to do with pedagogy of the lesson. Your objectives and goals have to do with these taxonomies. Based resources. What are you going to use? Are you going to use handouts? You're going to use classroom presentations? You're going to use, virtual tours? That's the piece that we talked about with the focus on the resources. When you start to deliver your teaching strategy, you're going to think about creating the lesson using a design model. I gave you 3 today: the ADDIE model, the CAMP model, and the backward design model. Okay? Think about how you're going to deliver this lesson. And then the final piece is, how are you going to assess it? For the traditional learner, you're probably going to stay with the conventional, but not necessarily. So this is kind of the engine now taken apart for the traditional learner. For the adult learner, you're going to be dealing with adult student characteristics. So you're not necessarily pedagogy, but you're going to be more skills that we talked about with the Carp model. Okay? You're going to be looking at using group modalities for teaching more than a lecture, not quite online. So you might want to consider using the backward design model when you do this, create this lesson for the adult. And for the adult learner, you're going to be doing more authentic assessment. You might have some conventional in there, but it's mostly going to be authentic. Okay, and then the last one for this part, you're going to be looking at distance learner characteristics. Who is the distance learner? How are they different than the adult? And certainly, how are they different than the traditional? Okay. You'll be looking at the technology economy that we covered to create your objectives and goals. I'm not going to ask you, as a student, okay, to identify or develop, design a spreadsheet template or generate a thematic unit, which is one of the very higher levels of our taxonomy, unless I know you can cut and paste and you can type and edit and you can post messages and you can defend. You got the idea. Okay? Down here, the online modality is probably going to be your primary teaching strategy. Okay? And you're going to be looking at virtual assessment tools, online tools. That's one of the toughest things about designing online instruction. And we see it here all the time. Talk about what piece are we missing? We're missing the piece of virtual feedback. Okay? We know how you get feedback in the classroom. Okay? I know how to get feedback with adults. But how do you get feedback when you're online like this, like we are today? You do it by asking some questions. You do it by asking them to submit information to you, a paper, but it's tough. You got to keep looking for virtual feedback. Okay. Now, a lot of material that we covered, and we did it in about an hour and 10 minutes. And this will sound like a commercial, but it's really not. But IGI published my book called Designing Instruction for the Traditional Adult and Distance Learner. And it covers the topics that we introduced today. It looks at the focus on each of the 5 areas, the learner, the learning, the resources, the outcomes. Okay, we looked at all of those in the book, and it also includes the technology taxonomy. But there's a lot of material in there about how to create adult learning lesson plans and so on. We're going to actually give one of these away. Anne's going to do that for us in just a minute. The other book that I used in today's presentation is a little bit older. It's been around for a couple years, but it is that taxonomy for the technology domain. And again, it goes through the 6 levels and talks about how you can develop learning objectives that are technology-based. So that was our presentation for today. And it goes back to the point that we made at the beginning, what are we missing? I think what we're missing, again, is a structured, organized model for building, delivering, and assessing technology-based instruction. And what I hope I gave you today was the engine for designing technology-based teaching that allows you to think of all of the different kinds of learners that you're going to want to teach, the different kinds of levels of teaching, the focus on the learning itself, the focus on the kinds of resources that you can develop, and the book is filled with examples of how to create technology-based textual material. It talks about how to create the interactive lesson. It talks about designing a virtual web tour. And then it focuses on the delivery, okay, the different ways of delivering to the traditional adult and distance learner. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, how to assess. So there we go. I hope that was of some use to you today. And I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Anne so she can finish up and identify the winners for us. So Anne, it's yours.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Dr. Tomei, for the wonderful presentation. We're really glad that everyone could join us for this event. Our webinar today has been recorded once again, and attendees will receive a link to access it directly. It is also available online at our website under online symposiums, where viewers can also see our previously recorded symposiums. Last month's webinar featured Professor Robert Hogan, and he presented Who Will Be the Leaders in Global Learning, which was a really great discussion on the challenges and competition universities face with regard to distance learning technology. It was really great. So that's available online should you be interested in that. Earlier, we selected some random numbers to see who would be receiving these complimentary texts. So the numbers I came up with were, forgive my pronunciation of your first name, but Rui Jesus, and then Chinmay Sehu. So you can send me an email to and if I don't hear from you, I will find you and get a hold of you for your contact information, and so we can get those out to you. But my email is listed on screen. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again at another upcoming event. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can always feel free to contact me or the other name listed, Saeed, is our Director of Sales and Marketing here at IGI Global. So thanks again, Dr. Tomei, and everybody have a wonderful day. Thanks for your participation.